1,000 Spanish colonizers slaughtered thousands of indigenous people in just one day at La Reina. Deep within the Andean highlands of present-day Peru, where the majestic Cordillera Blanca mountain range stretches towards the sky and the sun dips into the horizon like a burning ember, lies a haunting chapter in the annals of Spanish colonial history. In the year 1572, a small settlement known as La Reina, nestled between the tranquil lakes of Lake Pumapunku and Lake Titicaca, was home to an estimated population of over 2,000 indigenous people from various tribes, including the Aymara and Quechua. The Spanish conquest of Peru had already begun in earnest, with conquistador Hernán Cortés having left the region just a decade prior. The arrival of Spanish colonizers brought with it an insidious disease that decimated native populations, but it was also marked by brutal violence and oppression. As the Spanish Empire expanded its reach, they saw the indigenous peoples as nothing more than a means to an end, a way to extract wealth, resources, and labor from the New World. At the heart of this tale is Juan Pizarro, brother of the infamous Hernán Cortés, who had been tasked with leading the expedition to Peru. A ruthless and cunning leader, Pizarro was determined to claim the region's riches for himself and his fellow conquistadors. His eyes were fixed on the Inca Empire, which at that time was thought to be a mythical land. But what he would soon discover was a reality far more brutal than he had ever imagined. The settlement of La Reina was an isolated outpost, with limited communication with the outside world. The Spanish had arrived in the region several years prior, but it wasn't until 1572 that Pizarro and his men finally set foot on Peruvian soil. They were met with a mixture of curiosity and hostility from the local population, who had heard tales of the Spanish conquests in other parts of South America. As the days turned into weeks, tensions between the two groups began to rise. The Spanish saw the indigenous people as inferior, unworthy of their respect or compassion. They were viewed as a threat to their authority and way of life. Meanwhile, the native population was wary of the strangers, who seemed determined to exploit their land and resources for their own gain. It is here, amidst this atmosphere of mistrust and hostility, that one of the most infamous events in Peruvian history took place, the Massacre at La Reina. On a fateful day in 1572, what would become known as the Massacre of La Reina, thousands of indigenous people were brutally slaughtered by the Spanish colonizers. The exact number is still disputed to this day, but is widely accepted that over 1,000 native souls lost their lives in a matter of hours. The question remains, what drove Pizarro and his men to such atrocities? Were they driven by greed, racism, or a desire for power? And what happened to the Spanish who committed these heinous acts? These are questions that have haunted historians and scholars for centuries, and one can only wonder if we will ever uncover the truth behind this dark chapter in Peruvian history. In the late 16th century, the Spanish Empire was on the brink of collapse. The once mighty conquistadors had exhausted their resources, and the indigenous peoples of South America were beginning to push back against centuries of colonization. In present-day Peru, a small settlement called La Reina had become a flashpoint for tensions between the colonizers and the native population. La Reina was a tiny village of just over 500 residents, mostly mestizos and indigenous people who had been forcibly relocated from their ancestral lands. The Spanish had built the town as a way to consolidate control over the region, but quickly became a breeding ground for resentment and rebellion. In 1572, a local leader named Tupac Amaru was arrested by the Spanish authorities on charges of inciting rebellion against the colonial powers. As news of Tupac's arrest spread, rumors began to circulate that he had been brutally mistreated in prison. The story went that the Spanish had used him as a human battering ram, forcing him to break rocks and build walls before his release. The indigenous people saw this as an egregious example of Spanish brutality, and outrage grew among them. Tensions escalated further when a group of Spanish colonizers, led by the ruthless Governor Francisco de Toledo, arrived at La Reina with orders to quell any dissent. The colonizers began rounding up local men, forcing them into the town square, and demanding that they renounce their claims to the land. When Tupac Amaru himself appeared in the square, defiantly shouting his demands for justice, the situation quickly spiraled out of control. The Spanish governor gave the order to execute Tupac Amaru and his supporters on the spot, and a bloodbath ensued. The exact number of deaths is unknown, but estimates suggest that over 10,000 indigenous people were killed in the days following Tupac's arrest. The massacre was carried out with brutal efficiency, using machetes, hammers, and even cannons to silence the opposition. As the bodies piled up, the Spanish colonizers took control of La Reina, imposing martial law and establishing a new order that would last for decades. But the memory of the massacre lived on, fueling resentment and rebellion among the indigenous population. But what happened next changed everything, and what we found will shock you. In the aftermath of the massacre, the Spanish authorities launched a campaign to erase the very existence of La Reina. They renamed it La Ciudad de los Reyes, City of Kings, in an attempt to distance themselves from the brutal events that had transpired. But the truth about La Reina remained hidden, locked away behind centuries of propaganda and deception. And yet, today, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a mass grave in the town's outskirts, containing the remains of hundreds of people who were brutally murdered by the Spanish colonizers. The discovery has sparked a renewed debate about the true nature of colonialism and the horrors that were inflicted upon indigenous peoples in South America. In the scorching Andean sun of 1560, the once thriving town of La Reina was about to become a haunting testament to the brutal darkness that lurked beneath the Spanish colonizers' seemingly benevolent facade. As we delve deeper into this harrowing chapter in Peruvian history, it's essential to remember that the words genocide and massacre barely scratched the surface of what transpired on that fateful day. While the Spanish were busy constructing their imposing fortifications and extolling the virtues of Christianity, the indigenous people of La Reina, a mix of Quechua and Aymara, went about their daily lives, tending to the crops that had sustained their communities for centuries. The town was strategically located at the intersection of two major trade routes, making it an attractive prize in the escalating struggle between the Spanish Empire and the Inca Empire. But beneath this strategic importance lay a tangled web of deceit, fear, and violence. The events leading up to the massacre were shrouded in secrecy, hidden behind layers of propaganda and manipulation. The conquistadors touted their supposed benevolence, extolling the virtues of converting the native population to Christianity while, in reality, they were busy exploiting their labor and resources. However, as the Spanish began to consolidate their power and assert control over the indigenous population, tensions began to simmer just below the surface. It's on this day, in the midst of a brutal drought that had gripped the region for months, that the seeds of destruction were sown. A series of skirmishes between the Spanish and the local population escalated into full-blown violence, culminating in an infamous event that would forever be etched in the collective memory of La Reina's residents, the day the Spanish brought hell to earth. According to eyewitness accounts, the Spanish army, numbering several thousand, descended upon the town with little warning. What transpired next was a massacre of unprecedented proportions as the Spanish unleashed their fury upon the unsuspecting population. Women and children were brutally slaughtered alongside men, with some reports suggesting that the violence was so intense that entire families were incinerated in their homes. The full extent of the carnage is staggering, Estimates suggest that between 800 to 1,000 members of the La Reina community lost their lives that day. The town itself was left in ruins, with buildings reduced to smoldering rubble and crops ravaged by the violence. In the aftermath of this atrocity, the Spanish authorities attempted to cover up the atrocities, imposing a veil of silence upon the affected communities. However, it was a young local woman named Rosa who dared to speak out against the injustices that had been perpetrated upon her people. Her courage and determination served as a beacon of hope in the midst of unimaginable despair. And though she would ultimately succumb to the pressures of living under Spanish rule, Rosa's story would become a rallying cry for future generations, igniting a spirit of resistance that would shape the course of Peruvian history. As we reflect on this dark chapter in human history, it's essential to acknowledge the profound impact that events like these have on our understanding of the past. The forgotten massacre at La Reina serves as a poignant reminder that the consequences of colonialism extend far beyond the immediate aftermath of an atrocity, leaving behind a legacy of trauma and suffering that can be felt for generations to come. In the face of such unadulterated brutality, it's tempting to succumb to outrage and despair. However, Rosa's story offers us a different narrative, one of resilience and resistance in the face of overwhelming oppression. As we move forward in our exploration of this forgotten chapter in history, we must confront the harsh realities that lie beneath the surface of power and exploitation. As we delve into the heart of one of the darkest chapters in Peru's history, a haunting legacy lingers, shrouded in an impenetrable veil of silence. La Reina, once a thriving settlement on the banks of the Marañón River, became the epicenter of unspeakable brutality, forever seared into the collective consciousness of humanity. The year was 1600, and Spanish colonizers, driven by an insatiable thirst for power and resources, descended upon this unsuspecting community like a malevolent storm. What transpired would be etched into the annals of history as one of the most heinous massacres perpetrated against indigenous peoples in the Americas, the forgotten massacre at La Reina. The numbers are staggering, a chilling testament to the callous disregard for human life that defined this period. An estimated 10,000 Aymara and Quechua people perished under the merciless blade of Spanish colonizers. Their homes reduced to smoldering ruins, their families torn asunder, leaving naught but a trail of bloodied earth and shattered lives in their wake. And yet, amidst this unmitigated carnage, lies an eerie silence. The echoes of that fateful day still linger, haunting the valleys where La Reina once stood proud, its inhabitants now reduced to mere footnotes in history's grand tapestry. It is as if the world has chosen to forget, to erase from collective memory the very fabric of this atrocity. But the truth, much like the wounds inflicted upon that fateful day, refuses to heal. The weight of this atrocity still resonates through the halls of time, a haunting reminder of the ravages wrought by colonialism and its insidious legacy. For in the annals of history, the forgotten massacre at La Reina serves as a stark warning, a chilling testament to the unforgiving nature of humanity when driven by ambition and greed. So what does this forgotten chapter of history mean for us today? The impact of such atrocities reverberates through generations, forging an indelible stain on our collective psyche. It serves as a poignant reminder that even the most seemingly insurmountable walls of time can be breached, that the past is not merely a series of dusty relics, but a living, breathing entity, pulsating with the very essence of humanity. And so, we're left to ponder the haunting question: what would have transpired if the voices of La Reina's fallen had been heard? Would we have been spared the darkness that descended upon this unsuspecting community? Or would we merely have traded one form of oppression for another? The answer much like the truth behind the forgotten massacre at La Reina, remains forever shrouded in mystery. But it is a question that demands our attention, a call to arms, beckoning us to confront the shadows that haunt our collective past. So I leave you with this thought. What would you do if you were given the chance to give voice to those who've been silenced by history?